continue. To Nancy Kruger and I are co-hosts of the Masterclasses, or co-chairs and co-hosts. So this is our first one. We want to welcome you. With the list that Dana got, one of the areas was conflict. And so I thought immediately of Jim as I experienced this presentation that he gave to his district in Colorado. This is going to be a two-part series. Today, we're going to learn to control your emotions, control your world. What you're going to do is find out how you get into this anger piece and where it is, where you get into it. And then next time, we'll learn how to get out of it, hopefully. So Jim, hello. Okay, we got recorded again. Good.
Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. I didn't have to say okay.
This is my first time.
Well, we're having a great time, so I want you all to know this is our maiden voyage. So Jim's taught court ordered, company ordered, and in prison for 21 years in anger and conflict management. He is currently on the board of Stout Street Foundation, Colorado's largest drug and alcohol rehabilitation, where he also teaches anger management. As Pastor District Governor, Jim has been a Rotarian since 1991 and serves as the ombudsman for the District 5450 and chairs on the district's peace committee. He was one of 26 in the US to be trained in the new peace endeavors of Rotary International and the Institute for Economics and Peace. Recently, Jim was honored with the Service Above Self Award from Rotary International. Something that we tried to introduce was a little video of Jim's presentation, and hopefully we can do that each time. So it gives the members of 6690 a little flavor of what we're going to talk about. So Jim, first of all, this time what we're going to do is Jim's going to be presenting. We're really not going to do any breakout sessions or polls, but what we will do is that I will be fielding questions. And so if you have any during the presentation, don't hesitate to chat it down, and maybe Jim will be asking some questions to the group because it's not that large of a group right now. Hopefully we'll get it a little bit bigger. So Jim, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
You're most welcome, and I thank you all for the opportunity. This will be fun. Modifying my okay, sorry. Almost like I knew what I was doing, not quite. So between the stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Viktor Frankl said that many years ago, and this whole class is about that space. And that space is probably 1 second of the time. So we're going to talk for about an hour and 15 minutes about 1 second of time. And in this talk, if there are any questions, please put them in chat and send them to Gary. And Gary will interrupt me and will be happy to answer any questions at any time. So we're going to talk about parts of the brain. how they function, why it matters, basically how to control. One of the fun things about this is our knowledge of the brain today is really very new. It wasn't until the 1990s that we invented the fMRI machine. That was the first time we were allowed to watch an active brain in action in a real person. Prior to the 1990s, almost all of our knowledge about the brain came from rats, studies of rats. It came from studies of people that had accidents that lost literally part of their brain. It came from a lot of crude ways because we could not operate and we could not, it wasn't fair to open up an operating brain and look at it. So all of our knowledge came outside externally of the brain until the 1990s. So the amount of knowledge literally in the last couple of decades has been tremendous. So a lot of stuff we knew, such as you were told growing up by the age 25, you had all of the brain cells you were going to get, take good care of them because that was it. It wasn't until the 1990s, and in fact, it was probably into the 2000s that most all of the neuroscientists finally came aware and believed that, in fact, we are growing new brain neurons, new brain cells until we die, as long as we are standing. So we are still growing. But what does that mean? How do we control them? How do we use that? Another thing that has been important to me for a long time is the study of nature versus nurture. What can we control? How much of it is our DNA? How much are we locked into this? And how much do we have control over? One of the things, too, that we hope to get rid of is maybe we can get rid of some senior moments and learn what they are and how to control and get rid of more of our senior moments. Yes, as Gary said, this month, we're going to talk about the emotional control, about yourselves. We're going to learn about the brain, why it matters, and how we can control it, what we can control, and how do we control it, and why should we care. We're going to deal with emotions, but we're also going to deal with getting rid of stress, getting rid of the difficult times. A lot of this is valuable if any of you do presentations in front of audiences. One of the greatest fears of life is public speaking, and it's often been said that if you're going to a funeral, you're better off in the casket than you are having to give the eulogy. So how could we be comfortable in such environments? And that will be part of it. So let's go look at how this thing we call our brain is structured. Three basic parts, and they operate literally as three separate parts. Not 100% separate, but enough to you so that you understand how they function. Keeping in mind the reptilian brain, which is what all of your lowest animal has, lowest insects have. They all have a reptilian brain. Our reptilian brain operates our heart, operates our lungs, and is the basic control mechanism. The next part, the mammalian part, fine-tunes a lot of that, but the reptilian brain is our heartbeat, is our breathing, is everything. And then later, millennia later, we developed the next part, what we call here the mammalian brain. Sometimes we refer to that technically as the limbic portion of the brain, has a lot of our emotions. We'll talk more about that. And then at the top is the thinking brain. The thinking brain was added probably 100,000 years after the other parts of the brain. And in fact, as we go back, as we looked at the growth, we see that the brain suddenly got larger as we were looking at the upright individual. And that's when the brain began to fully develop. The interesting thing about the reptilian brain, when you are born, you are only born with a functioning reptilian brain. You have a lot of brain neurons, but they're disconnected at that point. You have very little of the mammalian brain and practically no of the thinking brain. One of the very practical reasons for this is, quite frankly, this is all you can get out the birth tube at that point. So you are born with the reptilian brain, which is controlling all of your bodily functions. As I said, you do have a lot of the other cells, but they're disconnected. And so the instant you come into this world, you begin to make those connections. And the connections we are going to refer to, or not we're going to refer to, they are synapses. The neurons in our brain, all of the cells do not physically connect solidly to the next cell. There is a gap between that cell, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. And that gap is the connection is what we refer to as a synapse. And some of these terms you may be hearing, there's more and more conversation about that. But that means we literally are creating our brain at the instant we are born. And needless to say, the thinking brain, or the prefrontal cortex, is the last part to develop. And it's mostly the part that is mostly affected by epigenetics, a term that you may have heard. Epi meaning outer, genetics meaning the origin, referring to origin. So the outer origin. So our thinking brain, thusly, is the one part that is greatly affected by external events. And this may be childhood experiences, positive or negative. This could be the environment, could be the air we breathe, the food that we eat. All of this is now affecting our brain as we develop. Yes, we're born with the DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. The DNA is a blueprint. We hear that we're so excited to find and map the DNA that is about everything in our body, and we can learn all kinds of our diseases, etc. But the DNA is actually nothing more than a blueprint, as a architect might draw a building and give a contractor this blueprint, which is the DNA at that point. But the contractor, or maybe the home buyer, may say, no, I want a little bit bigger room over here. No, I want to change this over here. And it's that epigenetics, as external forces, will affect and modify DNA. And you've heard a lot about mRNA, which is the messenger ribonucleic acid. The RNA is the model that leaves the DNA to go create a new cell. Our DNA is wrapped in an extremely protected cellulose. And then when it wants to make a new cell, which it does about 1,000 times a day, it sends out into our body an RNA. And the RNA then makes a matching cell. So that RNA is the messenger to show from the DNA to show what we will do. But in that process, the RNA then leaves that protected area and it gets into the body fluids, which may be filled with the alcohol that we had last night. It may be filled with the cigarette smoke. It may be filled with the toxic minerals from the water we're drinking, or many other things affect that RNA. So no, DNA is not absolute what we will be. Now, when I stand in front of the audience, you see that I tend to be a relatively short stature by some definition, particularly mine. In that DNA, yes, I probably will never get to be 6 foot tall no matter what I do. But emotionally, I certainly can change in a moment, and things can change me in a moment. So where there are limitations to the DNA, there is a tremendous amount of external forces that will change that. One of the most interesting things to me, if you look underneath now, the sensory thalamus and the amygdala are two major parts of that mammalian brain, of the limbic, or sometimes we refer to that as the lizard brain, and the cortex as the wizard brain. So the mammalian brain, where the sensory thalamus and the amygdala, all information. If you look at those little figures, all your hearing, all your feeling, all your seeing, all your tasting enters into the thalamus first, long before it gets to the sensory cortex. So all of the information that we hear, see, or feel goes into the center brain, into that mammalian brain, and then eventually gets up to the cortex. Therein lies some interesting challenges. The thalamus, our mammalian brain, can recognize the emotion of a face in 40 milliseconds, which is less than half of a second. The sensory will not recognize that face for over a second. So the sensory is much, much slower to catch on. That thalamus will recognize anything. And if you've heard of, advertising, there were techniques of advertising in the 60s and 70s. If you went to a theater in the 60s or 70s, they may show a picture of popcorn and a Coke for less than a second. You will never consciously see it, but you're sitting there and all of a sudden, why am I suddenly getting this strong urge for popcorn and Coke? And you run down and get a popcorn and Coke. Television, they were doing that Chevrolet. They would show a picture of a Chevrolet for 1 second. And they did outlaw that by the end of the 70s. But this is critical. And it's why the policeman sees something in your hand, and in that half a second has made a decision it's probably a gun and responds accordingly. So how does he control that? And again, it will take a minimum of 0.7 of a second before it even gets to the cortex. So the sensory thalamus, the amygdala, which is the amygdala's whole purpose is to protect you. And it gets that information immediately, long before the sensory cortex. So when somebody calls you a name or says something very rude, again, that emotion hits you very strongly first. Typically, we then will say, wait a minute, it isn't that big of a deal. But to the policeman, or to that situation where your life is at stake, and for 1 second or a half a second or 1/10 of a second, you see something that is fearful, we immediately respond. And so a lot of the rest of this program is going to be, how do we control that? Keeping in mind that whole amygdala is designed to protect us. It's the overbearing parent. It's going to protect us in any way, shape, or form. Thusly, when in that half a second, and in that half of 1/10 of a second, the body can recognize a positive looking face or a negative looking face. And that amygdala will make that judgment and send signals to our body to react accordingly. So, and it's very difficult to change the amygdala. When soldiers experiencing PTSD, well, many of us experience negative moments and they get implanted into that amygdala. Becomes very, very, very difficult to change and to unlearn. So if we live in this constant stress environment, if we live under this constant anger, this constant frustration, this constant worry, it begins to separate that sensory cortex and the amygdala. We begin to separate from our thinking brain. The more we live in the stress, after a while, and when I deal a lot with anger and anger management, and these individuals in many, many cases literally have forgot happiness. They have forgot how to create that, and it's called depression. You live in depression because we've constantly lived in stress and we have constantly disconnected from our cortex. The interesting thing is the brain does not know reality from fiction. In other words, all of these little pictures down here, all of this information is going in and it's becoming an electrical chemical environment. So when we go to tell somebody about that driver that cut us off, and then at 10 o'clock we tell somebody and we start reliving this bad experience we had, the body doesn't know the difference and the emotion is the same. The challenge with that is what's happening. We'll talk more about the neurotransmitters, but it's also sending messages to our body to protect us. And what it's doing is drawing blood from all of our other organs and sends it to our muscles so that we become strong. This was critical when we were trying to decide whether the saber-toothed tiger was going to have lunch or we were going to have lunch. And it was all in that split second of time. And that whole amygdala developed to protect us from things such as that. It really is not as necessary as it was at one time, but it is still there. In fact, it was there long before the cortex was there. And it was well developed. And so we have to develop, literally develop consciously the reconnection of that sensory cortex. So I'm going to, just for a brief moment, we hear a lot about the neurons, we hear about a lot about the cells. When we see pictures of the brains, we often see a lot of open space with wires connecting little balls or little things. We see it in commercials and things. What is that really? So keeping in mind, we have approximately 100 billion of these in our brain. So they would say. Some scientists would tell us 90 billion, some up to 200 billion. We have a lot of these, in other words. It's a neuron. At the very top, you see what's called dendrites, a lot of little fingers going out. At the bottom, we have axon terminals. The dendrites are the receivers of information. The axon terminals are the senders. So we have a series of these, probably many thousands going from our brain to our body, to our muscles, to our heart, to everything. So this is what controls this body. The dendrites receive the information, the axons send the information, and it goes down a stream. But each one of these a series of these are responsible for one neurotransmitter. So what is the neurotransmitter?
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
The neurotransmitter is that electrical chemical that is the connection in the synapse. As I said, the axons do not physically connect to the dendrite. There is an electrical chemical in between. And when we have a thought, if it's a happy thought, happy chemicals then run through the body. If it's a negative thought, negative chemicals run through the body. And you may have heard a lot about dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin are the most common happy chemicals. People with depression, we will give you drugs that build your dopamine. And of course, that's what illicit drugs do. The challenge with illicit drugs is we don't know how much you can handle and take. yes, you can handle some of it, but everybody is different. The challenge becomes, and the reason we're having such a problem with the legitimate drugs is dopamine makes you feel good and it makes you happy. And the more you take any sort of form of quote unquote happiness, which is chocolate or anything else we'll talk about, it kind of replaces the function of the brain. So when we use the word addiction, that comes from externally taking too many drugs that create dopamine, and the brain says, wait a minute, you're already getting too much dopamine. We're going to shut down and stop making dopamine. That makes you feel good. Thusly, you become addicted to whatever it is. This is the challenge with any of the drugs, even your pain medicines. We become addicted to those because it replaces the function of the neurology. And so we need those because the brain virtually has shut down. And so to get out of addiction, we have to go through a process to rebuild the brain. And we're going to talk about that. Serotonin is another one. Serotonin, the serotonin cells pulls the serotonin back up into itself after it uses it. So those are called serotonin blockers. And so some of our antidepressants are referred to as serotonin blockers, and they block the reuptake of serotonin, again, forcing more serotonin in your body. Oxytocin is the love chemical. The oxytocin is dumped into particularly the lady's body upon birth. And it's comical when you have a mother that's carrying a baby for someone else, a surrogate mother, and everything is going along fine between the recipient and the surrogate mother until the birth happens. The mother then is flooded with oxytocin, and that's our love chemical. We have the immediate attraction, and the mother has a strong attraction to the child and does not want to give it up. And so therein lies the lawsuits that follow. But it's all based on the oxytocin, which we weren't planning on, and the mother didn't think about it at that time. During lovemaking, the male is flooded also with oxytocin. And when we hug, and that's what they say, when you go Christmas shopping, buy something for yourself, which builds dopamine, buy something for somebody else, which is the feel good to the world, which is serotonin, and then you hug the server, which builds the oxytocin. Now you want to maybe be careful when you do that. But the dopamine makes you feel good about yourself. Serotonin makes us feel good about the world. Oxytocin is that strong attraction. The limit with oxytocin, it is the strong attraction to the family and not to everybody. Now, the we call them sad neurotransmitters. They serve a purpose. Cortisol is the negative term, which I'm a negative neurotransmitter. I'm sure many of you have heard of. Cortisols, adrenalines, norepinephrines. When we get stressed, whether we get angry, whether we get stressed, whether we get highly emotional in either direction, our body becomes filled with cortisol. And again, the primary purpose of all of this is to protect ourselves. And what cortisol does is draw blood from our stomach, from our intestines, and from many other organs, limiting and challenging digestions. It challenges the intestines because it's drawing blood from that. And so the more we live in stress, the more challenges we have with digestions, with intestinal issues, kidneys, and many other things, because we're constantly drawing blood from that to our muscles, also to our brain. Our brain is 5% of our body, but yet uses 25% of the energy it produces. So when we get stressed, we are pulling from all of these other organs. Often cortisol is referred to as the aging chemical. It's the aging neurotransmitter. because it will age us. It draws the moisture from our skins. So the best cure, the best skin solution there is laughter. You fill your skin with the juices that makes it happy and soft. So stay happy, look younger, and that's real. Stay happy, digest your food better, and that's real. So happiness is the cure. So are you all seeing a whole bunch of strange faces?
Yes.
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 1 through 10. You see, 1 through 10. 1 is kind of a smile where you feel pretty good. You're okay. 10, you're ready to kill. And every step into that. Want you to play with me for a little while and just a second here. And off to the right, there are 6 questions. The 7th one, I want you to make up. The scale 1 through 10 obviously is your anger scale. How angry are you? Are you 2? Are you 3? Are you 4? So on. And the questions to the right, take a look at the questions and attach a mental number to them. A driver cuts you off. Yeah, that's only a 2 for me. No, I really get upset. That's a 5. So take a few minutes, take a second here or a minute. I'll give you 1 minute to go through those and think about what number applies to those issues. And then number 7, think about one thing that really makes you upset. This is your information. We're not going to debrief this, but do take just a moment to take a look at those and attach an angry number. And I'll give you about 1 minute. Okay, I'm assuming that you've attached some kind of a number to them, or you have the idea anyway. And you may have heard about red flags from time to time, the importance of learning your red flags and learning your emotions. The biggest challenge with stress and with anger is it literally separates your cortisol, your cortex, your thinking brain from your limbic, from your lizard. It separates the lizard brain from the wizard brain. It closes down your thinking. The more angry you get, the more you separate from your logical brain. It's important to recognize this because some anger is good. In the 80s, the corporations were going to team building. Everything in teams, and we all gather in the same room and sit around and we talk and work as a team. And we realized that really wasn't that great because we're all looking over to the boss and we all want to please everybody. And it realized that it took a level of 2 or 3, maybe even a level of 4 of adrenaline rush into our body to get that cortical working well. So some level of frustration can be a benefit in these. A pure, straight team, flat team is not always the best way to get the best creative ideas. We need that adrenaline flow. We need a little bit of cortisol going through our body. But there is a limit to that and how much is beneficial. And it's the importance to recognize when we are at a level 5 or above, we are no longer our logical self. In other words, the policeman that for 40 milliseconds sees something that he thinks is a gun and responds. How do you get into that? And that's moves you into that. So how do you move into that cortex? So it's recognizing 5 and above. We are no longer our logical self. We're in that illogical moment. We're going to say something illogical. We're going to do something less than positive. And so it's important to recognize that so we can step out of that moment, step out of that environment. And you make a plan for another time. You meet at another time or something. So that's the value of that. 5 or above, logical. But some stress is good. I want to spend the next few moments here on how we can change that and look at some techniques. Quite frankly, may I ask you, what are some of your favorite techniques to calm yourself down? When I get stressed, what are some of the things that you would do? Michelle.
Some of the things I like doing that really affect me the most are some meditation or tapping.
Oh. Meditation or
Tapping.
tapping?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, excellent, excellent. Would anyone else like to share techniques for calming themselves?
Conscious breathing.
Marty?
Consciously breathe, like just counting when you breathe and bring it all down, and counting when you breathe the breath out. You do that a few times, and physically it helps me and mentally it helps me.
Yes, yes. And we're going to talk more about some breathing techniques. Dana?
Mine is similar to Marty's. Have you heard of 5-finger breathing, where you breathe in as you go up and out as you come down, and in as you go up and out as you come down?
I'm going to share a little bit more on that. Excellent. Perfect. Wonderful. Keep it up. Any other techniques?
My techniques are not that positive. I either leave the area of the conflict, withhold talking for 5-6 seconds, just kind of mentally shut down for a bit.
Joe, that's wonderful. And it's good that you can recognize that. And that prevents, that way you get to keep your friends. So that's good. Excellent. Any other ideas?
I go for a run.
Oh, run, physical exercise. Keep it in mind, our body is now filled with the cortisol, which is not a lot different than drinking. If our body fills with booze, they say it takes about an hour to get rid of an ounce of booze. It takes a couple hours to get rid of flush cortisol out of our body. Exercise will help speed that. I want to share a couple other ideas and see if they make sense at all. Some we've talked about. The deep breathing, I teach the 4-7-8 technique. You're right. Breathing in energizes the sympathetic nervous system. We have basically the ANS, the automatic nervous system, running up and down our spine, is made up of 2 different systems. The sympathetic and parasympathetic, and that may be valuable to know that if you come to a trivia contest, but not much else. But bottom line, the sympathetic energizes your body. It causes you to breathe deeper, your lungs to work farther, your body to work harder. Your parasympathetic slows your body. When you body needs to slow down, your brain sends that information on the parasympathetic. When your body needs to step up, it sends the brain sends the information down on the sympathetic. So you breathe in slower or quicker on the count of 4. You hold for the count of 7. We don't hold long enough for the lungs to completely clean and clear, which is the purpose. And then we breathe out on the count of 8. Any approximation into that is acceptable. The primary importance is that you breathe out much longer than you breathe in, so that you're energizing the parasympathetic, the relaxing, and that will help build your relaxation. The hand, the 5 fingers, pretty much does that, but that's what you're trying to do. Breathe in quicker, breathe out slower, and hold at the top so that your lungs have an opportunity to flush. Relaxation, of course, is just sitting. Whoops. Mindfulness, meditation, prayer, any of that is highly beneficial. There's nothing ever wrong with, we've grown up in our lives and we have established our belief system. There's nothing wrong from time to time to question our source of our belief system, and is it still working for me? Then being logical, consciously think about logic. One of the most valuable tools in this whole kit that I'm going to, I think, to me anyway, is the thinking the word stop. The thinking the word stop is what we call a pattern interrupt. We live 98% of our life, if not more, in our limbic, in our lizard brain. We rarely move into our cortex, our thinking brain. We drive a car, we play an musical instrument, we play a sport, all by habit, and it works quite well. We take a shower, we wash, we do everything by habit. And the next time you get in the shower, just wash the other hand first and see the challenge that you have on doing these simple little things out of our normal habits. By the way, our habits are down on the brain stem, the very bottom of our brain, which is why it's so difficult to change habits. It's not easy to get there. So when we are living in our limbic brain and we're feeling the stress and we're feeling, maybe it's self-doubt. I'm going into a presentation and I'm developed with self-doubt. If we think the word stop, that literally moves our brain into the cortical section of the brain, our thinking brain. And then we get into our thinking brain and we say, wait a minute, then we can become logical. This really isn't that bad. I'm prepared. I can do this. I can handle this. That individual didn't really mean that. But it will move us from that negative thought into a more positive attitude. One of the most fun things to do with that is when you're in a discussion with somebody and they say, I don't know, just in that same tone of voice that you've been talking in the same approach, ask them, what if you did know? And if you are able to not crack a smile, which is becoming more difficult for me, this is powerful. Hugely powerful. And I learned this technique way back when in sales training. Somebody says, well, I just don't know the answer to that. Well, what if you did know? And what it does is move them from their brain. It is a pattern interrupt. But their mothers always told them to answer questions. And it moves them into a different thinking part of their brain, and they will come up with the answers. And it enables you, if you're having a discussion with somebody and you get into this mental block and they say, well, I just don't know. What if you did know? Can just open up the world of conversation. Next time, if you remember that, try and use that. It will work 90 to 95% of the time. Once you learn this technique, however, the greatest difficulty is to keep them smiling. You must continue in your same voice so that you don't draw a flag. And we'll talk more about the body and the body language next month. Because a lot of that's part of the language. If they do not see a change in your body language, they will go into their thinking brain and begin to come up with answers where you can then process and begin to process a little deeper. A lot of fun. Rehearsal. Why on earth would I do a rehearsal? Because anytime in your life that you've had a bad experience with an individual, in a place, in a location, at an event, your limbic remembers that. So the next time you get in front of that person, your limbic will begin to go into that defensive mode. And again, we'll talk more about that next month. Because 100% of your emotions are on your physiology 100% of the time. That could be a little embarrassing at times. But again, I repeat, 100% of your emotions are expressed somewhere, somehow, on your body 100% of the time. So when you've had a bad experience with an individual, with a place, location, you go in and your body is in a protective mode. And that protective mode is broadcast out. That other person will see the protection and how to get away from that. One of the things we'll talk about next month is charisma. What is charisma and what is the science of charisma? It is analyzable. It is not born. You're not born with it. It is something that you can do. And we'll get into more of that. But the rehearsal for now, for this time, is when you're into a situation and you're going back to that situation, how do you prepare yourself? How am I going to see this person for the first time? How am I going to experience this for the first time? What is a camera on the wall seeing for the first time? Or what is a microphone hearing unemotionally for that first time? So that's valuable. And valuable technique to remember that your body remembers and your body will go into a protection mode. So you must eliminate that, consciously be aware. And again, the deep breathing is one great way, and there are many other ways to do that. Count to one. We've heard as a child, well, count to 10 before you make that decision. Again, as I've shown you, 40 milliseconds, which is less a half of 1/10 of a second, your amygdala is responding and acting and setting up your body. If I can get you just to count one, that's more than a second. You're already into your cortex. So if you think about, before I respond, just count to one. Don't take the time to count to 10. Frequently, again, I would love to say I'm 100% master of all of this material. I'm not. I will say an hour before anytime I give a performance, I will look over this and say, what do I need to do to become this person? And every now and then I want to change my attitude. I want to change my habits. And as I said, habit changing is not an easy thing. And so I need something to physically remind me. When I started doing this way back when on a car, I had a little stick-up note that I put in the dash of a car that said, I will allow 3 rudenesses emotionally free. Whether that was true or not, whether it worked or not, it's irrelevant, because what did work was it was a reminder to think about, well, wait a minute, I don't know the emergency that person is in. I don't know the challenge that individual's had. I don't know what his spouse told him just before they left. I don't know, is that really important to me? So it caused me to consciously look at a moment. And there are different things that I want to change about myself, and I'm still working on it. And I will put something in my pocket, a stone or something unique, and I'll put my hand in the pocket during the middle of the day, and that will remind me, today I want to learn to wait 2 seconds before I respond to anything. And if I can do that. So make use of that. We used to talk about tying a string around your finger. Well, then you have to explain it. Put something out of the ordinary in your pocket and look at that as a reminder. And when I'm working with anger management people, I'm working with people that are fairly committed to their anger by the time they get to me. So using the opposite hand for 24 hours is huge. What are we doing by doing that? By using your opposite hand, or eating with the opposite hand, driving home in a different way, causes you to think about that action. Nothing more than that will reconnect the cortex to the limbic and reconnects to our thinking. And that's the advantage of, I use luminosity as my mental training. I love that. It's games, but it's also a mental challenge. They talk about the value of learning a new language to keep the brain active. And this is what we're trying to do, is keep those connections. Because as we get older, we move more into the limbic. We are living more by habit. We are more committed to our positions. We understand the world much more clearly. And so we are committed to that. And quite frankly, becomes more and more difficult to get into that unique thinking position. So keep doing something. Eat your peas with a knife instead of a fork, or do something where you actually have to focus and think about it. It's a fantastic technique. Progressive muscle relaxation can be done very simply, quietly, and nobody knows you're doing it, or it can be done very progressively. Progressive is starting with your feet, your ankles, and working through your body. What I like to do occasionally, and what you're referring to, is breathing on your breathing in. As you breathe in, you tighten all of your muscles. You squeeze your cheeks together in every way you can and tighten every muscles and tighten your wrist. And then you just all relax, let it out, and let your muscles relax. Again, prior to a stressful experience, it's a great way to get rid of that. Exposure to bright light. Yeah, bright light is happier than dark light. I shouldn't tell you a sugary drink, but sugar builds serotonin. And that's why one of the reasons we love, sweet chocolate. We say chocolate. Pure chocolate is pretty bitter. So we add sugars to it. So we eat a lot of sugars with our chocolate. And that will make you feel better because the sugars build serotonin. And again, when we eat too many, it's the same thing. Many people do, in fact, become addicted on chocolate. It's the same as any other addiction. And what is addiction? It's replacing the function of the normal function of the brain. And so, whereas if you're feeling stressful and you know that you can handle it for a short while, take something sugary, eat a piece of chocolate to get you through that moment. It's okay. Again, exercise, as we talked about, is a great way to clear the body. Healthy diet, eat well. And again, there is nothing better than laughter to create the dopamines of the world, of your brain. Do as much laughter as you can. Read comics, read jokes, buy a joke book, and just occasionally pick it up and read it to build that serotonin in your body. Count to 20 backwards, again, is just another technique. Takes a conscious action. And so it's a conscious process, and you have to think about it, and that makes that reconnection. And then creating a positive anchor, creating hypnosis. And that positive anchor is another subtle little technique, and it's basically a hypnotic technique. When you're sitting there and thinking, sit and focus on something very positive in your life. What really is good? What really makes you happy? Where's the happiest place you've ever been? Focus on the happiest place or the happiest time you've ever been and think about it. And then when you're really focused in that happy moment and you're emotionally connected, maybe take and pinch a skin somewhere or do something unique. And it makes that anchor. It's what we call an anchor. That's basically what a hypnosis is. We can anchor that good feeling to when we get into a negative feeling, we can pinch ourselves in that point and bring ourselves back into happiness. I think that's enough material today. Are there any questions or conversations or thoughts?
Thanks, Jim. Any questions? This is the second time I've heard this, and I'm always learning something more and more each time.
I can't wait for part 2.
There's a good glass of red wine come into all that.
It can be calming.
That's the happy time.
A glass of red wine can be calming. We do, again, as I said, we do create new brain cells throughout our living day. A challenge for that is some of the medicines that we're on blocks those. So we don't always all get access to that. So be careful that some of the medicines, too much liquor will affect that and will destroy the new ones. I'm not about ready to give it up, but be aware of that. And well, now I'm getting into Gary's stuff, so I don't want to do that.
Oh, go
Yeah.
ahead, get into whatever you need.
We do build new brain cells, and we build all cells throughout, because originally, while the stomach is replaced almost, when is it, Gary? In less than a year, your entire stomach is replaced in less than a year, which I've always wondered if that's the case. Why does stomach cancer last longer than a year when we get a new stomach? So we send in cells. Cells have memory, but
There's a question that asking if we'll get the recording on YouTube, and will we get a copy of the slide deck, Jim?
you can, if you like, yes.
That would be great, and then I can send it out to everybody.
All right, fine.
Jim,
Yes.
let's say this, we have an experience of anger, and where does processing the experience come in? You know, try to think about it, what happened, where does that come in? Will that be next time, or does that come into anything? I don't know if I'm asking it right, but
Tell me more.
well, I have an experience and I got mad at this person. And then I just, after I come back away from it for a while, I could process it maybe and think about what really turned me on, or meaning turned me off and made me so mad. That's the processing I'm talking about. Becoming aware of why I did what I did when I did it. So hopefully I won't do it again, but it won't happen because I'll still erupt.
That's beautiful. No, you pretty well answered your own question, but it sounded like you were beyond a number 5, which is easy to do, which happens frequently. Joe said walk away, which is pretty much, you walk away and yes, you process it. You think about what he said, what did he really mean, and try and understand what is it you don't understand. And again, that's where the rehearsal comes in, Gary, because the next time you go in front of that person, your body is in a protective mode. So how can I get out of that protective mode? What questions can you ask them to better explain where they're coming from? What are the real issues you're dealing with? Because sometimes you can't process it by yourself. You're not able to process it right there because, again, we have disconnected from the cortex. So take a moment, take a deep breath, come back in an hour, ask if you can meet later on this same subject, and then ask more questions to better understand what's the real issue. What am I dealing with here? And would be my answer to that question.
Okay. Any other questions? We have one chat. Let me make sure it's not a question.
All right.
Okay. 1 glass of red wine, serotonin. 5 glasses.
Yes.
5 glasses, cortisol. All right. Well, thank you all for showing up and participating. We're going to do this, I think it's August 10th. Will be the second Tuesday of next month. And we'll have part 2 of Jim's presentation. So please come back and learn some more.
A lot of it will center around, in all communication is 55% physiology, 37%, 37% tonality, and 7% words. So what does that 39% and 7% is words. So we'll talk a lot about that and how does that work and control that. So I'll see you all in a month.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Jim.
Thank you,
Great
Jim.
job.
Thank you, Jim.
Amazing.
Thanks. See ya.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Jane is asleep.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gary. I
Well,
appreciate it. Great.
let's do just a quick process and once
Okay,
we,
so I get to pull your line. What's your takeaway?
yeah. Oh, I had participated in this when he did it in Denver over Zoom, and it was just as good, and I got more because I'm in a different place now than I was then, and I'm always learning something. I guess just processing our time together. I mean, should we do anything differently? You know, I was thinking as he started talking, maybe if we send out a couple reminders, like on Monday, a
Yes.
reminder of tomorrow night is our master class, just to put it in their awareness.
Okay.
I know for me, I have a 24-hour reminder and a 2-hour reminder on my phone and a 1-hour, so I don't, if it's a meeting. And I was just thinking about something like that. We could maybe do the week before or the Thursday before and then the Monday before or something like that.
Okay.
Just to put it in their minds. I don't know how we could invite people more, because I thought that short video was just super that he did.
I pat ourselves on the back, but I thought how we put the announcement together was great. I do think I should have followed up with some reminders that I didn't do. So
Well,
I think that's a good point.
This is our learning experience, because
Right.
we had so many sign up and we had 18 total showed up. So
Yeah, perhaps part of that reminder would be, like Jim had that little questionnaire. It might just be something that would get the brain thinking.
yeah,
That might have been fun to send out ahead of time with the question, with the reminder.
right. That's a good idea. I'll
Just
ask
get the
Jim if
brain
we could,
thinking.
a tease of what we're gonna be working on.
I love how our announcement went out with the video and the logo and then the blurb. I mean, the whole thing was great.
Yeah, you did a good job.
No, cheers to us.
Well, yeah, but it's just we're 1-2 in it,
Right.
1 + 1 is 10,
Right.
We add to it as we go along.
I did a recording, but they'd asked me, I can't remember what it asked me, so I just clicked the first one that came, which was iCloud. So hopefully the iCloud is YouTube.
No, iCloud, iCloud is where you can go get it.
Right, so then I'll just have to get it off of that, but I don't know if it's in a YouTube format. The YouTube is much better, but hopefully it is in a YouTube format of some sort. But I don't think it is, so I'll just have to send it out as a recording.
Okay, yeah.
I'll just have to figure out how to do that. This is my first time being the recorder of.
Right, and Dave or Dana should be able to help you there.
Right, Dave or Dana could help with that.
And then we can do it, and then we could send that out. What we could do is send that out as soon as we get it, but we could also send it out with the reminders.
I think I would send it out as soon as I get it, along with the slide deck, so everybody has those two together in their emails.
And then registration too for the next one.
Right.
We could have that there in case they would like to look at that and register as well. I don't know if you can combine the two.
I think I can. I think what I would do is send this one with the recording to the whole district, like have Dave do it. I think that's a great idea. And
Definitely,
just so people who couldn't make this one, but can make the next one, at least have some foundation of what we covered in this one.
because they can have the rest of this month looking at it.
Right.
So I no, I definitely think that. I'm just thinking of, with the next one coming up in August. So,
I think
then
you're
we'll-
right. Multiple reminders would be good.
yeah. And then I think that we'll need to do is we're going to get a meeting, would be the first Tuesday of August.
Mhm.
So it'll be us, as part of our co-chairing, we will, let's start planning on working towards November
Yes.
as part of that meeting. And I'll put that down as such too, so
Okay.
that we'll remember to do that. And
Great.
what are you taking away?
I have been fascinated by the brain. So when I told you I read the male brain, the female brain, and of course, being in a medical family, I've been around a lot of that discussion on chemicals and everything. I did not know that it actually changes your DNA. I did not know that. I thought it was all happening emotionally, but I didn't realize that it changed the DNA physically. I know that when you're under stress or happy, your body is different, but I didn't know that was DNA.
I think it'll change more the RNA, the messaging. The DNA is your basic, it can't change unless you mutate it. So that's,
emotions will not mutate that.
no, not the DNA, but the RNA,
Okay.
it can. Like your DNA's, either you have blue eyes or you have brown eyes.
Right. I didn't think DNA. I thought
But you
Bill, my
Can't
stepfather always
change
said.
that. Yeah, you can't change that. It's genetics, but the RNA, that will,
Well, thank you for that clarification.
yeah, no, that's,
Bill always said when you're born, you're done for.
no, that's
You
right.
have your DNA.
That's exactly. Okay, well, thanks so much, Nancy. And if we need to get together, let me know.
Okay.
I think I'll get with Jim soon, once we get the video, and I'll just check with him so that when we want to send out our next invitation for August, I will have all that information.
Hi, Jane. You woke
Hi,
up. You're on mute. I'll have to take you off of mute here. Can you unmute? There you go.
I was listening, but I got tired of watching.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for joining, Jane.
Bye-bye,
Yeah,
Jane.
Have a
bye-bye.
good evening.
Bye, Nancy.
Bye, Gary. Thanks so much.
Thank you.